the activities of people and the locations of these activities are the process by which physically the resources, natural resources, are managed. The way in which also some of the income is coming, the external income for the community comes from this management of resources, but it also is a thing which binds the community together. Communication and social interaction between people, and it is related to, well, you could say the bottom one you could say is like cosmovision, I guess. Also the understanding, the communities, the people's understanding of where they came from, the mythologies of their origin, and these things are interrelated in space as well as in people's thoughts. I think that's about it. Yeah. Oh, so that was, yeah. So the point of a story is that mapping the indigenous territory or mapping the indigenous space is not just a question of locating some things physically in space, not just a question of looking at the economic points, like where the roads are, where the market is, where the export products come from, but a combination of the social, the economic, and the cultural, you could say sacred, as well as that. These things are interrelated in locations and in people's behavior.
Hago una síntesis. Y por cierto que esto de lo que está hablando, acabo de descubrir este libro en Querétaro con sus colegas. Creo que ya Mauricio lo cita. Se llama La inconstancia del alma salvaje, de Eduardo Viveiros de Castro. Tiene un capítulo buenísimo sobre esto que está diciendo Mike, que se llama Perspectivismo y Multinaturalismo en la América Indígena. Buenísimo. Y tiene que ver con esta no separación de lo natural y lo social, y tiene que ver con el territorio, la construcción del territorio en esta no separación, que aquí esta compañera lo hace de manera esquemática, y cómo liga lo sagrado, lo social, lo económico, lo ecológico, y el hábitat como lo ecológico, ¿no? ¿Sí? Con las formas en cómo se construye, se negocia el territorio, los territorios, y precisamente esto es mapeable desde el punto de vista participativo. De tal manera que no hacemos una separación entre un mapa económico y un mapa social, sino intentamos entender las relaciones de lo ecológico con lo social, con lo económico, y eso lo localiza a la gente, ¿no? Esta idea, por ejemplo, de la procesión que veíamos, el caminito es una ruta sagrada. Entonces, ¿qué es? Una vía de comunicación, un tránsito en un ritual, etcétera, etcétera. Tiene una multidimensionalidad, y esa multidimensionalidad constituye en la percepción de esta gente, en su universo, que estaría centrado en la maloca, la idea de que es el eje principal del modo de vida, y que esto permite el metabolismo socioecológico o el equilibrio social. Entonces, esto es lo que ella hace en el Amazonas colombiano. Entonces, vamos a ver, me imagino, mapas de eso. You have maps on this idea?
Not with me. Yeah.
¿Cómo se llama la dama? ¿Es Susana? ¿Es Susana?
No. This Angela Lopez. Angela Lopez. I mean, now she's working in Bogotá, the Universidad Nacional. But she was working many years in Amazonia. Yeah, Leticia, or some area around there. Yeah.
Y como comentaba Edgar, que vamos a convertir las presentaciones en PPS para circularlas junto con el video, porque se va a ir más rápido y entonces
okay, a couple of other applications of which communities are using people are using SIG Participativo for. This is a relatively new one, and the PSR is something which is a very contested policy in Mexico and in other countries. But leaving that aside, some communities are wanting to map their servicios ambientales, because if they are looking for compensation for it, let's look at non-Mexico, because then we don't get into arguments. But in other places, if you identify the servicios ambientales, which the community is managing, then I map it, measure it, monitor it, then there's the opportunity to be involved in PSR programs. So mapping is part of it. What is growing very, very important and very, very big is the mapping of the PSR of carbon. Why is it so important? Because with post-Kyoto Protocol, what is called RED now, climate change, etc. Why is it important? Because there's huge amounts of money involved in this. And the opportunities for payment for carbon sequestration are enormous. And it's relatively easy for big commercial companies or big forest companies to say, yes, we're growing trees, we are sequestering carbon, therefore, please, United States, France, European Union, pay us. It's very, very difficult for communities to say, yes, we are also growing trees, we're also protecting trees, how about some of that money for us? One project which we're doing, a big project we're doing from SIGA, is looking at the opportunities for communities to make some of the claim for this carbon money. Because this community is in Uruapan, in Michoacan, it's typical indigenous community. They are protecting the forest for different reasons. They're protecting the forest, but protecting the forest includes protecting carbon, sequestering carbon. Therefore, why should they not also receive some of these funds, not just the commercial forest company? And then we want to mapping of it. Yeah.
Un poquito complicado. Aquí está un libro que acaba de salir, en donde Mike tiene un capítulo que valdría la pena que ustedes lo tuvieran. El libro se llama el monitoreo de los bosques comunitarios para el mercado de carbón, oportunidades en el marco de este nuevo programa que se llama RED, que ha sido muy criticado. RED, ¿qué quiere decir RED?
RED, Reduced Emissions from Deforestation and Degradation of Forests. Degradation is the key point. Yeah.
Reducir las emisiones por deforestación y degradación de carbón.
Yeah.
Entonces, este capítulo explica con más, abunda más en esto, pero con estos aparatitos que ustedes están viendo, que son, digamos, una especie de teléfonos, es posible hacer trabajo con la gente para esta idea que tenemos nosotros de los guardianes, ¿no? Cómo monitorear el que en realidad, cuando una gran transnacional dice que está aforestando, que está haciendo crecer el bosque, que está cultivando el bosque, que está cuidando, además de hacer su aprovechamiento forestal, está cuidando todo lo que ahora se llama como servicios ambientales. Los monitores o los guardianes con esta información pueden ver si esto es cierto o no, y además en sus comunidades hacer los estudios de manera muy sencilla, utilizando estas herramientas para pedir el dinero que está de los servicios ambientales, ¿no? Ya ven que está ahora en el discurso del gobierno mexicano, que es uno de los países pilotos de este programa RED, y que es peligroso para nosotros porque los bosques están en el 80%, 60% de los bosques están en propiedad social.
Correct.
Y por lo tanto, ellos quieren echar a andar estos proyectos, pero con compañías, etcétera, etcétera. Y entonces hay, digamos, como una tensión entre propiedad social, digamos, legislación por costumbre, etcétera, etcétera, frente a estas transnacionales que se quieren meter, ¿no? Entonces, ¿cómo potenciar el papel de los guardianes para el resguardo del patrimonio biocultural, que sería, en este caso, lo que nos interesa?
One significant point here is because this to be involved in a PSR program, like for carbon, it is necessary for the company or the community to say, this is the amount of carbon which we have, this is the amount of carbon after 5 years it's increased, therefore give us some money. The monitoring, the measuring, the mapping is very expensive if it's done by professionals, us or somebody else, or professional or a consultancy company. It's so expensive that there's no money left for the community. Therefore, if a community wants to and is interested to see if he can do it, the cost of the mapping and the measuring has to be reduced, because otherwise they pay. If they receive some money from Conifor, whoever's going to pay, that money is already spent on the technicians and the professionals. The approach of SIG participativo is to minimize the cost and to give the measuring and the monitoring, the mapping into the hands of the community, because the people in the community learn to use these things. They have the information. They keep the information. Maybe they keep the information for other services as well, biodiversity, pollination, other services. So they have the opportunity to claim payment for giving these services to everybody else, which is what PSR should be about. So it's necessary to reduce the cost of the mapping. Yeah.
Por un lado, la construcción de estos mapas para digamos, estos programas de pagos de servicios ambientales que ahora están de moda, ¿no? Lo que hacen es, o sea, si a mí me contratan para hacer un mapa de esos, yo cobraría muchísimo, mucho dinero. Y entonces, si lo hacemos de manera participativa, uno, empoderamos a la gente para saber dónde, por ejemplo, están los lugares de polinización, cuánto cuesta en este programa, cuál es el pago por una buena polinización en un buen bosque. Ahí hay dinero que ya está catalogado para darlo como pago de servicios ambientales o filtración de agua, o protección de la biodiversidad, o etcétera, etcétera, ¿no? Entonces, esto lo hace la gente y sabe dónde está, y entonces puede acceder a esos pagos con todo el problema que significa eso, ya sea en términos económicos o ya sea en términos de servicios para la comunidad, en fin, acuerdos, y esto hace que se reduzca el costo de la cartografía que se requiere, y esto políticamente es muy importante porque entonces se negocia con la transnacional o con la Semarnat o con la CONAN, no sé, ¿no? Entonces es un ejercicio y es un, digamos, un enfoque, una forma de empoderar o hacer más poderosos a los locales, pues, ¿no?
Okay, so this was some work we're doing in Orapan, or some indigenous communities in Orapan, and the community were using, well, a few people in the community were trained to use handheld computer, but also the smartphone, and they are mapping various important, the route. That was a cyber tracker. They were using some software to do that. You can map the route if by car or by walking or by burro or whatever travel you're doing. It's easy with a burro. And then they're mapping several things. They're mapping the different character of a forest, different type of forest. They're mapping what is needed is some sample points for doing annual surveys of the trees, but they're also mapping the management of a forest, because part of the discussion in red is to see what is the best natural local management, the management by the local community. And they're mapping the dangers and the risks and so on, where there's illegal felling, there's fires and so on, conflicts between different people. And so all this information is coming from the members of the community in meetings and in walking and doing profiles. What's the right word? Transectors. Yeah.
Sí, interesantísimo, porque aquí se utiliza en este contexto el teléfono y hay un software gratis que uno puede bajar del internet que se llama Cybertracker, y lo que hace este software es que permite hacer la ruta. Esta ruta fue utilizando un teléfono, y donde uno se para, el programa permite guardar en la memoria información relevante al lugar donde se hizo el ejercicio de manera digital para pasar a una base de datos. Entonces, por ejemplo, en este caso se encontraron lugares en donde
It's land uses.
Árboles, pastoreo de ganado,
Land use.
Entonces uno lo hace, pero ellos aprenden a utilizarlo y después ellos van a monitorear si sigue siendo el mismo valor o el mismo uso, y entonces se vuelven guardianes de un buen manejo de los recursos. A esto nosotros le llamamos transecto. Entonces el transecto lo hemos hecho generalmente caminando, con la grabadora, preguntando, en fin. Ahora lo podemos digitalizar en un mapa y ver, por ejemplo, los cambios en el uso del suelo, etcétera, etcétera, etcétera. El software es gratis, la utilización del teléfono, y entonces lo que hace uno es enseñarle a la gente a usarlo para defender su lugar.
Una pregunta técnica, quizás boba. O sea, ¿no depende eso de tener señal en el lugar, o es una señal distinta, o cómo funciona con los teléfonos?
Es un teléfono como este que tiene señal.
GPS.
Pero necesito tener señal. Si no hay señal en el lugar,
No.
para poder hacerlo. No es por satélite.
It's different signal.
Son diferentes.
Yeah. From the GPS satellite.
No es como el iPhone.
But yeah, exactly. But can be a problem in forest, because maybe you're not getting a signal from a satellite. But already the technology is getting better. The precision of a GPS in the cell phone is less than with expensive GPS, but we don't need high precision to show where there's some damage from degradation, there's some damage from cattle. You don't need to know down to the last centimeter. In this forest area in Orapan, we were getting, with the cell phone, accuracy of 1 or 2 meters. It's more than enough. We could do with even less than that. So that's not a big problem. And you don't need to make a telephone call.
Inclusive con el Google, cuando nosotros lo corregimos, hay un algoritmo, bajas el mapa de Google, aplicas al algoritmo y entonces corrige la imagen para que las coordenadas que tú tienes en un GPS, sin necesidad de utilizar esto, pero con el Cybertracker lo puedes usar, ¿no? Vas apuntando, vas creando símbolos en tu transecto, y la gente después va a ir a recorrer cada 15 días para ver si ya se llevaron el jaguar, para ver si ya taparon el manantial, ese tipo de... Es decir, para ver en qué estado de conservación o de degradación está el lugar donde ellos creen que es de gran valor patrimonial, biocultural.
I would like to repeat a political or ethical point. In the coffee time, we were talking a bit. This mapping is not necessary for the community to look after their forest. Of course, they're managing a forest already. They're managing the land already. They don't need us to come and say, now to map it. That's not the point. But if that community wants to be, or needs to be, or is even forced to be involved in some, say, national program of PSR or something, then they do need this information. And they need to show this information in the way in which CONAFOR, whoever, demands the information. So that's the purpose of it. It's to empower the community to to transact with external agencies, or even NGOs or other things. But of course, they've been managing their forest perfectly well for, 50 years, 200 years without maps. They don't need it. Yeah.
No, lo que funciona ahí es la manera en cómo uno almacena la información, y que la gente con esa información, con el monitoreo, permita negociar. Aquí la cuestión es que esto permite negociar, ¿no? Ellos hacen sus mapas sin tener que utilizar esto. Pero aquí ya hay un dato preciso con un monitoreo cada 20 días. Si ¿se acuerdan del programa Pro Árbol? Ese que dijo que iba a reforestar no sé cuántos árboles. ¿Qué tanto funcionó? ¿Cuáles eran las especies correctas? ¿En dónde se puso? ¿Dónde se hizo la reforestación? ¿Qué grado de éxito tuvo? ¿Cuántos dinero le dieron? Etcétera, etcétera. Se puede localizar y está la base de datos para negociar en un siguiente programa de reforestación, ¿no? Pues esto no funcionó por esto y esto y esto, y aquí sí funcionó, en fin, ¿no?
Okay, another application, move away from that, and this next one is more urban, but some of you will be interested. Using the mapping to do with manejo de riesgos de desastres. This is a very interesting thing. As from your anthropological background, you will also know about local knowledge, local experience. Some disasters, in the world of disasters, we do not separate natural disasters from human-made disasters. They come together. But in the world of disasters, some are quite frequent, and people live through them. If you live through the disaster, you learn about it. You accumulate knowledge. Some disasters, like tsunami, are very unusual. We don't learn because they're not frequent enough. A disaster like being hit by a meteorite, we learn nothing from that, so there's no local knowledge. But flooding, for example, is a very good example. Forest fires, minor earthquakes, etc., are very frequent, so the local community, local people learn about it more than the scientists and the planners know. So, again, the idea is mapping local spatial knowledge of accumulated, built-up local spatial knowledge of communities in order to improve disaster management.
Se puede usar para otros, temas como son los desastres, la vulnerabilidad, la capacidad de resiliencia, las rutas que los gentes han construido. Por ejemplo, nuestra amiga... ¿Cómo se llama nuestra amiga colombiana? Graciela hizo su tesis de doctorado, la dirigió Mike, sobre el conocimiento que tienen en un pueblo filipino que recurrentemente se está inundando. Entonces, por ejemplo, medidas para saber si es peligroso o no. Si se inunda hasta aquí, yo sé qué es lo que tengo que hacer, y si se inunda hasta acá. Entonces, las medidas del cuerpo están en función, por ejemplo, de las decisiones que yo tengo que tomar para salvar a mis hijos, para salvar a la comunidad. La ruta que yo tengo que tomar dependiendo de dónde viene la inundación, el tiempo que dura el agua hasta aquí o la rapidez, ¿no? En fin, una serie de...
For how long?
¿Y cuánto tiempo dura la inundación? Una serie de medidas que la gente tiene utilizando el cuerpo y otros elementos para resolver, para resolver el riesgo, ¿cómo se dice? Para evitar el riesgo. Y, por ejemplo, como rutas de evacuación. En México, si esto se utilizaría para los terremotos, por ejemplo, que son más o menos frecuentes, y nosotros ya tenemos un conocimiento local sobre los terremotos, porque más o menos son frecuentes. Entonces, ¿cuáles son las rutas que yo debería tomar si el terremoto se da en la colonia del Valle, que es mucho más frágil o más vulnerable que aquí, por ejemplo? Entonces, ¿cuáles serían rutas de evacuación, los tiempos, etcétera, 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 etcétera? Entonces, el mapear estos conocimientos que tiene la gente son muy importantes para países como el nuestro, ¿no? Estas avenidas, ¿cómo se llaman? Los
Landslide, desplazamiento.
Sí.
Landslide. Yeah.
Los desplazamientos de tierra en pendientes muy...
mud flows.
Que se dan mucho en la Sierra Norte de Puebla. La gente sabe cuándo eso se va a venir abajo y por eso no hay tantas muertes, porque sabe la capacidad que tiene el suelo de tener cierto volumen de agua sin que se vuelva un material líquido. Entonces, ese tipo de mapas para evitar desastres también es posible.
So the top two photos are from Indonesia, from Java, yes. And the guy is showing where the flood is coming. And they live through this flood. It comes twice a year. People have adapted to it. They adapt by putting the fridge and the television on some concrete to raise it. They have some place upstairs where they take the food and they sleep, and the animals go, the chickens even. Not the ducks, the patas, because they enjoy the flood. They get involved. Patos, patitos. So there's local mapping in the jargon, in the theory of disaster management. You have to know about the various data about the amenazas, the location, the frequency, the vulnerability of people and of objects, and the coping mechanisms, adaptation. Standard surveys, scientific surveys, will learn something about the data of the flood, of the disaster, the hazard, we should say, the word hazard. But local people have much more knowledge about it. As we said, the frequency, the height, how long it continues. Only local people can really tell you about vulnerability, where the vulnerable people are, and only the local people can tell you about coping mechanisms. Last year we were also doing some work in Caucasus Mountains in Georgia on this same thing, getting local knowledge about desplazamientos. Deslaves. They call their mud flows, but they're not really mud, they're stones. Yeah. And they're very frequent in the Caucasus Mountains because it's very, very mobile. And they have much more knowledge about the frequency. They also have more knowledge about the likelihood, the probability of the flows. Because we compared with the map from the Ministry of Geology and the maps made by the local people. And the local people had much more information about where these mud flows were coming. And the vulnerability of different groups of people.
O sea, basándose en la idea de que la gente con la experiencia que tiene ha desarrollado una estrategia, múltiples estrategias en función de la severidad del desastre. Un ejemplo que yo tuve, Mike, es en el río Limpopo, en Mozambique, en donde, fíjense, el conocimiento que tiene la gente de inundaciones recurrentes sirvió para establecer en un programa de hábitat de la ONU, rutas de evacuación, etcétera, dónde poner las casas de campaña, dónde establecer un lugar para los paramédicos, etcétera, que había sido diseñado por Hábitat sin la consulta de los locales, ¿no? Y hubo una inundación y murieron muchas gentes porque hicieron rutas de evacuación que eran las incorrectas. Se reorganizó esto con conocimiento local y entonces en la siguiente inundación hubo 75% menos de muertes. Y entonces eso significa una sinergia, ¿no?, entre el programa que establece el gobierno y el programa no formal que tiene la gente para evitar estas cosas.
The bottom picture is another hazard, the hazard of bad smells in Brazil. And the group, we were having a training group, and they went out and they were mapping some hazards, and they wanted to illustrate that the hazard there was some chemical smells. So the only way you can do it is to show. It's difficult in a picture. Another hazards is security, safety security, using local knowledge, local spatial knowledge. The map one is from a European example, from Romania, and they've accumulated, they've brought together many individual maps which people have made of danger areas. But the photo is a better illustration. The photo is from Morelia, and we went as some training. We went to this community and asked them to make maps to locate environmental hazards. But the community, the people in the community did not map environmental hazards. They wanted to show us where the security and safety hazards. So we learnt, that's what I keep saying, we should ask the people, what do they want to show on the map? What is the purpose of a map? Their purpose was to mark danger areas. This is one colonia in Morelia, Punuato. And what she's showing is areas where there are narco dangers, there's thieves, there's where people hide and will do things. The areas were very dark, so that people don't like to go, especially women don't like to go in nighttime. Areas where there are no policemen, areas where there are too many policemen. So for the community, the hazards were social hazards, more important than environmental hazards. And she's doing it marking onto an aerial photo. Now.
Interesante porque podemos hacer mapas de la contaminación por olores, ¿no? Hasta dónde llega el olor y cómo mitigar ese olor, es mal olor. O se me ocurre pensar, Mike, en estos días que vivimos del tsunami, que aprendimos de ese tsunami en la India, en Sri Lanka, que aprendimos que una joven que había estudiado geografía inglesa y que había escuchado que los elefantes tienen la capacidad de percibir la llegada de un tsunami y suben a las partes más altas para resguardarse, y ella se subió al tsunami alto. Así se llama el elefante. El elefante, y se salvó, ¿no? Entonces, esto implicó mayor presupuesto para las escuelas de geografía.
Well, both, yes. Indigenous knowledge from the elephants.
Exactly.
But there were three stories there. Yeah. The elephants, well, the story is that the elephants knew the tsunami was coming because they didn't find dead elephants, but maybe they got swept out to sea. Okay. The second story is of a young English girl, schoolgirl, whose geography teacher by chance had told her 2 weeks before. The third story is of one island of Sumatra where tsunamis have happened before, but the community is very strong, the local knowledge is very strong, the cultural strength is strong. So the stories of tsunamis had been told to people, told to children, told to other people. When the earthquake came, in that island, everybody immediately ran to the mountains. And there's some film of that, because someone happened to be there. No casualties. Another island 20 kilometers away, everybody was... Well, not so, but or people who had forgotten these stories. The community had become too modernized, whatever you want to say, but they'd forgotten these stories. So when the earthquake came, they didn't think water goes and comes back. Yeah. So that was the third story is a real story of indigenous knowledge, local knowledge.
Creo que sí se entendió, ¿no? Una isla en Sumatra.
Sumatra.
En Sumatra. Un pueblo que tiene experiencia sobre los tsunamis y es transmitida de generación en generación porque son muy recurrentes estos fenómenos. La gente no se murió porque supo detectar y prevenir, y en una isla a 20 kilómetros más allá quizá los turistas alemanes no conocían esa experiencia, y entonces la cultura pues el valor que tiene esa cuestión, ¿no? Y hay otros ejemplos, por ejemplo mapear la velocidad, el color, la forma y la orientación de las nubes para prevenir inundaciones o desastres por una tormenta. Se da mucho en México, en Michoacán, por ejemplo, yo lo mapeé. Muy interesante.
Okay, but we were supposed to be talking about seguridad urbana. Why don't you away from tormentas and thing. A couple of years ago, I did exercise in UNAM, Instituto de Geografía in UNAM, in Seoul, and I asked the participants to go outside with the maps and so on to map security issues, danger areas of amenazas in Seoul. And they had a few things about here's some chemicals and something else. But the main thing the students chose to map the dangers of crazy Seu cyclists. When we did this, the bicycle paths of Seu were very new. They'd only been there 1 or 2 months. And the crazy Chilango cyclists were really a hazard. And in this particular place, people were crossing over. And even when my students were there mapping it, somebody crashed into somebody else. And so sitios peligrosos are from cycling. But they also were mapped, as I say, other sitios peligrosos of maybe chemicals or waste, medical waste left outside, and other things like that. Yeah, but that's and you can see there the yellow route. This is also using CyberTracker or something, and they can mark different places, and then you can take photos as you go along. So to do with dangerous places in the urban. This was an example from Medellin, Colombia, the same kind of exercise, and they were marking also good areas, bad areas. It's very primitive, this methodology, but you would develop it. This would be the first step. You just ask people to say which areas are safe, which areas are unsafe, which areas are pleasant, which areas are unpleasant, agradable or poco agradable or non agradable, etc. as a starting point. And then, as in any participatory approach, you build on that slowly. You spend more time, ask people why this area is agradable and this area is not, why it's safe or not safe, and build up you could say a model, build up an understanding of what areas people think are safe and unsafe and why. Clearly, some of them are very clear to us. I mean, there's garbage dump. There's also some landslide areas within this is a campus of the engineering faculty in Medellin, and areas which were pleasant, etc. Yeah, that's all. Nothing more to say. I think we should finish in a minute or two. It's lunchtime. This is the presentation I will go after lunch. How to do it. Looking quickly at some of the tools and techniques. So we won't say anything about that now. Represent of a local knowledge about water. This is about water. Okay. The pig knows where the water is to keep cool. It's important to say that SIGPay is, I think one of the interesting positive things about SIGPay, it's not just individual people's maps, but it's also social. People work in groups, people work in communities. You can get a mixture of individual mental maps and maps and understandings of space seen by larger groups, by communities. So the normal approach would be to look for different groups, minorities, indigenous, religious, etc., landless people, old people, and so on. And they, in this SIGPay methodology, they make different maps, and then they can sit down and compare the maps, or make little models. We'll look at that later. There's children in Carendero. The terminology, the jargon, the terminology, but I don't know what we should call it in Espanol. Contramapas. Yeah. It's just a nice term invented by some lady 20 years ago or so. But the idea of it, the concept of countermap, is that standard maps are made by people with power. They're made by governments. They're made by Ministry of... In the old days, maps were all made by Ministry of Defense. It was always the army who made maps in the old days. Or Ministry of Planning, or Ministry of survey or something by powerful people. And therefore, obviously, it shows what the powerful people are interested in. The counter map is the idea that maps can be made by everybody to show their interests and their needs and their knowledge. And some of the first examples were what they call gendered maps. So in a community, in a village, the men would make a map of land use and land ownership and resource management, and the women would separately make a map. And sometimes you can hardly think it's the same village or the same community. There are very, very big differences. And this is just an example from Dominicana of a counter map showing, if you can see on it, you can say which things are under the control of men or under the control of women, which are under the work of men or the work of women, not necessarily the same, and so on. But counter maps can also be used for poor groups, subordinate groups, etc. So it's a nice concept. It's a very important concept, in fact, in PGIS. A purpose of PGIS, of SIG Participativo, is to make counter maps, contramapas.
Sí se entiende, ¿no? Aquí está la simbología, ¿no? Si los dos géneros comparten el mismo espacio, en este caso que es un proyecto introducido, es para hombres, en este caso es para hombres y mujeres, pero estoy buscando para mujeres. Fíjense, para mujeres sería este y este, que está cerca de la casa. Solo que la especialidad es diferenciada. Entonces lo que señala, y es muy claro, es que cuando uno hace un mapa del territorio con mujeres y después lo hace con hombres, van a ser dos mapas totalmente diferentes, incluyendo el conocimiento local sobre suelos, plantas, etc. Entonces siempre trabajar con niños, etc.
Maps can come in many forms. One actually says there's a Michoacan map, which is in flowers. That one, yeah. But it's actually a map showing aguacate in one community, but is with flores. And the other map is actually not Michoacan, it's Jalisco, of course. Obviously. And it's a map made by women in, embroidery. They're sewing it. But there's a lot of information in it. It's a map of the community of Cosalapa. And on that lower map, women are showing the central part of the village, where the resources are, where the wildlife are, where the animals are, and so on. Maps don't have to be on drawing, and maps don't have to or to be in a computer. There are other ways to show them. An issue which we just run through very fast. If you were geographers, I would make this point more strongly. Geographers believe in spatial precision. They want to know exactly where things are. They want to get the precision down to a meter, half a meter, 10 centimeters. To them, that is very, very important. And I think it's I would call it a fetish, in fact, because they forget about what the map is showing. They're so obsessed with the map being exactly the right location, but then you say, location of what? What can we see on the map? Well, I don't know if it's just showing a town or a place or something. We don't need high precision, spatial precision. I can't say exactly what we need. It depends on the purpose. If you're making a map of property in the city, then of course you need a high precision. But if you're making a map of how people use their land, a precision of 10 meters, 5 meters doesn't matter. So it's important in PGI, in SIGPE, not to be too worried, to be too preoccupied about spatial precision. Precision of the content is more important.
O sea, la precisión hace una distinción entre lo que hacemos nosotros de manera cartesiana, se obsesionados por tener el punto en el lugar exacto para clasificar todo este rollo. Contra una idea mucho más interesante que es lo que hemos venido viendo, es más bien cuál es lo que hay detrás del objeto localizado. Y no importa tanto la precisión de la localización, sino qué significado tiene ese objeto para la gente y cuál es, digamos, su área de distribución. Solamente los geógrafos utilizan esa precisión para la guerra, ¿no? A los 104 Tomahawks.
They're not at all precise. They say they are, but they're not. Yeah, exactly. The collateral damage because they're not precise. No, but especially in our colleagues who are working with satellite images and SIG, they become, as I say, or they have an obsession with exactly the place, the point, and they forget about the content, what it's showing. Okay, well, we want to show PGIS. We want to show things which are diffuso, ambiguo, and we have to use or develop techniques and tools which you can do that. I will not talk about those tools now, but it's a requirement in SIG Participativo that we can represent things which do not have fixed boundaries, but they are vague, they're fuzzy, they're variable. In reality, not just we don't have information about it, but the boundary is truly, honestly variable. It's not just we don't know. The locations of things are variable. The use of things are there's an intrinsic variability, and we have to try and show that. And we'll look at that a little bit in the afternoon. Okay, I'll just end with just showing you that people are working on this. Some of the first, I don't mean academic discussions, but actually practical training for it. The first ones are from Canada. For example, this quite famous book called Chief Kerry's Moose, a guide to land use and occupancy mapping and data collection. Let me tell you the story, and then you can translate if necessary, why the book is called Chief Kerry's Moose. It's part of this indigenous tribes claiming land. This group was claiming some land a long way away from their village, and of course the government and people ask them, why do you say that is your land? What is the evidence that that is your land? And they said, here's the evidence. Chief Kerry, 80 years ago or something like that, he had a moose to eat in a feast, and he had hunted it. There are no moose here. He got the moose, he killed the moose, 50 kilometers away or something. He would not have been allowed to kill that moose and bring it back if there were any other people living in that place. He could only kill the moose in that place because that place belongs to us. So it's part of their evidence for saying this place, this is our territory. It's like, do you want to translate that? Oh, a moose, yes. An elk. But it's bigger than an elk.
Sí, para recuperar tierras, este grupo indígena en Canadá estaba, digamos, defendiendo su territorio histórico frente a otros, y entonces utilizaron la experiencia de un viejo que iba a cierto lugar a cazar el alce, yeah. Y a partir de eso reconstruyeron la espacialidad del territorio.
Yeah. It's part of a claim. It's I think in court you could argue it, but that's why they called the book Chief Kerry's Moose, because it's the reason for doing the mapping is to claim a land, but you have to have evidence that this is your land, and that's okay. And there's some other examples, more increasing number of handbooks, guidebooks, manuals for working with this. Nicaragua was produced for that. Well, it says so. Even Prasado in Probado in Nicaragua. Okay, for mapping and also for making the models. That one's for making the models. The one at the top is in English, but actually it's from Brazil. They have Portuguese and Spanish version. Methodology of collaborative cultural mapping. And these are the people from Manaus in Amazonia who've done a lot of work. The top one. Yeah. And the third example is from Colombia with WWF, and they've also made some books and some videos and things about how to do it. So I just showed those to say that this idea of using SIG participativo is not completely new. It's not experimental. It's not just a crazy idea, but in fact there are quite a lot of areas which are countries and communities and organizations which are developing it, and even they're providing training material how to do it in Spanish and Portuguese as well as in English.
¿Tú tienes estos en digital?
Yes, mostly.
Sí.
So,
Okay.
yeah, sure. Yeah.
Pues creo que no tengo que traducirlo, ¿no?
No.
Entonces, con esto cerramos. Entonces, la siguiente sesión, ¿qué va a ser, Mike?
Mm-hmm.
Are we going to do the exercise, or first you will?
First, a little showing about the methods, and then the exercise.
En la siguiente sección vamos a hablar sobre ética y de buenas prácticas, etc. Y después un ejercicio y una discusión, etc.
First of all, but after lunch. We're having a lunch break now, aren't we?
We have lunch.
Yeah, good. After lunch, we will look at this one. Some of the tools we use are illustrated already here. Just drawing on paper, the mental map. These are the ladies of Kusalapa. Using aerial photos in Kenya, which you've seen that picture before, laying out the aerial photos.
3D.
No, this one not. This one is just a mosaic, air photo mosaic. Mm-hmm. Bottom left. Abajo izquierda. Arriba derecha is 3D. Arriba derecha is 3D, where you have a anaglyph, geographers call it. It's printed. That picture is printed double, and if you wear glasses red-green, you can see the topography. This one we did in Michoacán, near to Morelia, with children, and it's really fun to do it with children. If they haven't seen before, they're looking at this funny, fuzzy diffuso picture. They put the glasses on. Wow! The mountains jump up and down. And the bottom, abajo derecho, is a model, maqueta. And each of these I'll say something about as we go along, I think. But more theoretically, but you anthropologists know much more about this than me. We geographers are learning a little bit about inscribiendo conocimiento and incorporando conocimiento. And most of what we deal with is escribiendo. So maps, data, written data, cadasters, databases, etc. And in English, incorporated knowledge, incorporando conocimiento, which is incorporated into people's actions and movements and behavior. And maybe some of the ones we look at a little bit as ceremonies, dance, music, not about music, etc. But I believe that in SIG participativo, we should also try to understand and utilize that information. Not easy for us. And of course, we're looking at qualitative information, qualitativo and quantitativo information. We're looking at both of those. We're looking at information from discussions, from talking, discourses, etc. SIG participativo uses a very wide range of tools. So SIG participativo is not defined by the method, is not defined by the tool, is defined by what you're doing and what you're trying to do. Working with people, local knowledge, local conocimiento espacial local is the term which we use. In English, LSK, local spatial knowledge. That's what we're looking for. We're wanting to do it with people, for their reasons. That's what defines SIG-P. A big range of tools. Some of them are well known in sociology, rural sociology, I guess in anthropology. RRA and PRA in Espanol would be called what? I bet people here know it. Wait. I've got it written. Participativa. Yes, yeah. Yeah. The World Bank took it. They didn't invent it. They're good. And actually, they have some good material on doing it, actually. Yeah, okay. I'm not going to argue the philosophy, etc. of it, but some of the tools used in RRA and PRA are very useful in this SIG-P. Ephemeral map, ephemeros, means maps which, ephemeros, does maps which exist for a short time. You draw in the sand or on something, stones. But of course, now we can also take digital photo of it if we want to keep it. In the old days, it was really ephemeros, and now it's not. We can make it permanent. Participatory drawings, dibujados, counter maps we talked about, photos, videos, participatory photos, participatory videos, etc. If you have used techniques from RRA and PRA or participatory RRA, you will know these things: aerial photos, meetings, interviews, semi-structured interviews, transects, walking across, transactos, observación participante, where you actually take part in things, trabajo participante, working with multidisciplinary groups, etc. And these are some of the principles of working with RRA, PRA, working with local informants, using different methods of the data collection, different methods of the técnicas analíticas, whichever is appropriate. But like in PRA, in PGIS, SIG-P, the analysis should be done participatorily as well. It's not a question of going to the community, collecting information, taking back to the lab, to the laboratory, to do the analysis. As much as possible, the analysis is also done with the community. Therefore, choosing analytical methods which are not too confusing, which are not too complicated. We're not doing SIG-P to write papers in ISI journals. We're doing to impress the other academics. We're doing SIG-P to work with communities. Therefore, sometimes we have to not use the most high-tech and high science methods for analysis.
Perdón, si se capta eso último. Sí, si no, digan.
It's okay.
Bien.
Okay. Anyway, we can kind of get down to methods. This is local spatial knowledge incorporando. He is a chief in South Africa. He even says chief, though actually it comes from Kaiser chiefs, the hat, not. And he's showing this is our land, there's other things. So that's the information which is there, and our job is to transcribe this, to translate that into maps or something. But the knowledge is with him. An interesting sideline I have not done myself, but I read about, is maps as dance, and this is very particular in Australia. Songlines are the maps which Australian Aboriginals make for navigation in a very, very difficult environment. We would all die within a day probably in that environment. They live their lives in this environment. They need a lot of local knowledge of food, water, safe places, dangerous animals, other tribes to trade wives with or food or something. They do not stay in one place. They don't have paper. They don't have walls of the caves to mark on. How do they keep this very detailed geographical knowledge? They keep it in dance. The dance illustrates the whole map, the navigation of maybe several thousand kilometers of walking during the year. And that dance they can take with them. They can't take paper. They probably have laptops now, but they didn't before. And it shows time and space.
O sea, sería distancia abajo y la X sería tiempo, ¿no? Entonces hace esta línea.
Tempo is the y-axis and distance is the x-axis. Maybe these ones you've seen, we call a transect, a geographical transect. I like it because a lot of information in a small space, in one page. You have a geo-transect. On that transect you can show land use, land cover, cubierto de suelo, uso de suelo, suelos themselves, the plantas, the animales, livestock, problemas and oportunidades. You can show it all in one small picture, geographically, because it's from a mountain, it's from a cuenca, it's a cuenca down the mountain down to the river. Historical transect this is not a very good example, but for some interesting things, it's from India. Time, you can see. Old people were asked to say, what did your landscape look like? What did your village look like 40 years ago, 50 years ago, I guess? And what does it look like later? The present time is 1990. It's an old picture. And it's two advantages of it. One is it's easier for people to make it rather than they don't want to write down all these details in a notebook. And it's actually easier for us to interpret. To put all that information into words would maybe 2 or 3 pages of writing, and you would get very bored reading it. But all that information is in one picture. So I think that's also an advantage of it. Information about how the forest has changed, how the cattle have changed, the land use, etc. And they call that historical transect. Transecto histórico.
¿Sí se entiende? Está padre, ¿no?
Dibujos, how do you say, just sketch map? A dibujo sketch. Dibujo sketch? Dibujo sketch?
Sketch.
Esquema, ok. 2 esquemas de una... Muchas gracias. De una comunidad en África del Este. Uno es desde las mujeres, and uno es desde los hombres. Which is which? It's the same village, a sketch map made by men and by women in the same village. Which one do you think is the masculino and which is the femenino? Which drawing is from men and which drawing is from women? ¿Por qué? ¿Por qué?
The chief's house, the hospital, the school, the institutions.
Alternativa? Why? ¿Por qué?
Because of the roads, this is like more, está pensado en las calles, digamos, en las salidas y las entradas de la comunidad. Lo que pasa es que no se ven las letras,
Yeah.
pero se ve como un concepto como más externo y este es como más interno de la comunidad.
Very good. Very good. Yes, the scale. The scale is the... It's not obvious, but the interesting thing, it was in the same place. Yes, the men's map is looking at a bigger area. I should say also that it's a Muslim Islamic village. Not necessarily women are kept wearing burqas and so on, but they're less mobile. They're less active outside the area. And that's exactly why the women show where the school and the hospital is. They're responsible to take the children to the school and everybody to the hospital. Though there are some anomalies, there's some strange things in it also. But anyway, yes, the men's map is different. So, yeah, you can do this in many places and get interesting. I think you'll be surprised by how big the differences are. Sometimes I think it's just in theory that there will be differences, or it's just in the books. But in reality, the differences are enormous. The same in navigation. How do men and women navigate? I do this as a thing with my students in Holland. And we ask one boy independently to tell us how to get from the classroom to the center of town. We ask a girl student separately to tell us how to get from the classroom to the center of town. The differences are enormous. But we don't have time to talk about that, but it's very interesting. Okay, bosqueos cartográficos, that's what we were calling them. Sketch maps, yeah. The second one, the one on this side, on the derecha, is also from Africa. Just one illustration from this. People show what is important, they show to be bigger. They make the things which are important to them, they make bigger. So in that village, it is not to scale, it's not to geographical scale, although someone has put a scale at the top. Because the buildings, the places, the things which are important, they make large. And also, it's interesting, they've made it like doesn't have a wall around it, but they make it like it is protected. It's our village, it's our community. The one on the other side is a more standard one from Argentina. This is interesting. Maps from children, home spaces from children. These are very different age children. The youngest is the one, the bottom left. Let's get no. That one. Yes. Yeah. It's from just a 3-year-old or 4-year-old child. And I can't interpret. You would have to work with a child to interpret it. And the last one is more or less designed on top of a standard map. But in fact, Narciso gave an example earlier today. Children have different knowledge from adults, different knowledge which they will often not share with their parents or with their teachers, but they might share with people from outside who come. And I haven't done many examples in rural, but in urban, the children will tell you very interesting things about safety, security, nice places, nasty places. One project is for children to map from home to school. Because the journey from home to school can be difficult for children, can be dangerous for children in many places, can be difficult, boring, whatever, there's other problems with it. And very, very few urban planners or urban governments look at that issue. But it's probably the most number of journeys made in any town is children going to school and back. Every child is doing that at least twice a day, maybe 4 times a day. And who is looking at it? Who is studying it? And you can get the children to make a sketch map. You can get them to look at a Google Earth image. You can give them a GPS and a camera. Say, take pictures from home to school. Show us what is safe, what is dangerous. Okay. Right. The herramientas, again, we look at them. We've got the traditional ones, and then we've got the more innovative ones, some of which we've already talked a bit about. Aerial photos, photo maps, Sigmovil, using the GIS in the field with a handheld computer or with cell phone, iPhone. MDA, what does MDA stand for now? Because I've translated it, I can't remember. Maybe, but we've already got P3DM. Never mind. It'll come, don't worry.
Yeah,
Yeah. P3DM is
Modelo de elevación.
Thank you. Yes, that's right. Yeah.
El mapa este.
Yes. Elevation models. And the P3DM is maqueta, made with people. And I think discursos means discursos, probably, etc. There are many other things, video. Okay, how we start to do it? Well, actually, you've seen these pictures before, so let's move on. I got a couple of. This is from my colleague in Cieco, in Morelia, Andres Camul, and I used some of his slides of getting from sketch maps to georeference maps. So the sketch maps look like this. Participatory sketch mapping of suelos, vegetación, and hidrologia. So the soils and the vegetation and the hydrology. The people just are sketching that on. That's like a first step. And then he converts them into something georeferenced. You don't have to make the change. It depends. What is the purpose of this map? So it's not an absolute requirement to do that. But if it's necessary, if a purpose is to make a georeference map, then that's the next step. With some errors, because the drawing by the campesinos are rough, and when you transcribe that into a GIS, maybe you make a few errors, but we don't need perfect location. We don't need perfect accuracy or precision of a place. But what it means is the information, this is the information from people, from the local people. And it probably is different from the information from the scientists. Something you might... Well, this is... No, I don't know if any of you work in urban areas, but there's a global program called Green Map system, which is really getting very interesting now, because more than 60 countries probably have examples of this. It started in California or somewhere, but is widely used. It's for local communities to make their own maps, green maps, counter maps, usually focused on environmental issues, of environmental amenazas, hazards, dangers, problems, or good environments. It's increasingly used in many places for bicycle mapping, because most cities are not very good yet at making the bicycle path or mapping it. So, for example, a recent one in Santiago de Chile was the local community was mapping where it's safe to go by bicycle, where it's not safe to go by bicycle. There are children's versions of it, youth map makers. The ones focused on recreation, there's ones focused on open space, there's ones focused on, as I say, environmental issues and so on. It's a nice thing to look at. They try to use a standard methodology just so that you can make comparisons, but I think it's not necessary for everyone to use the same methodology. It's the concept which is good. This is one example from Colombia. Not a very good example. There's not very much on it. Pereira is in Caldas. Okay, photo interpretation. You saw one of these pictures before, but it's a method. Starting with, this case, an aerial photo. But nowadays, this was 6 years ago. Now we would use this Google image. And with a piece of plastic overlay on top of it, she is marking things. That is Rosé. And you might recognize some of the other guys also. It's Punuato. Yeah. You saw some of these pictures before, but again, it's to illustrate the methodology. the whole community sitting around the aerial photos showing this is our indigenous land, this is the land stolen from us, these are the names of places. You might, in gender terms, you might note there's only one woman in all the pictures. Otherwise, it's basically men who are doing it. Mostly old men. Or the young men were sometimes told, you do the drawing, and the old men would say, this is what you have to do. Anaglyphs. You've seen that example already. The newer things. Virtual globes. Sigmoville, Cybertracker. Okay. Google Earth, you know already. I'm not going to say more about it. For different versions of Google Earth Pro, you can get historical images as well. And you get more metadata about where the image is coming from. But it costs you, but not that much. It's variable. The quality is variable. Some parts of the world are badly covered by Google Earth. Georgia, where we worked, for some reason, had virtually no Google Earth. The scale may be different. The date, as I say, you don't know which year. Well, you can find out which year, but you maybe not get the most up to date. You have cloud cover, of course, problems, but basically it's a very good starting point. Google. Narciso, do you know where this is? This is an interesting. Geographically, this is a very interesting location. It's the only land border between Europe and Africa. That's why a big fence, a big wall. Africa on the left, sort of Europe, more or less Europe on the right-hand side.
Egipto is Israel?
No, it's Melilla.
Melilla.
Yeah, or Ceuta, one of those, which Spain claims to be part of their country. And every year that wall gets higher and higher to keep out the... Anyway, Google Earth can find everything for you. You can look at Guantanamo Bay with Google Earth and see everything. Different versions of it. Okay. Well, the earlier things I was showing you was mostly maps, participatory maps. Now we talk about participatory GIS, participatory SIG. Why? What's the advantage of it? Georeferencing. With a GIS, you can say where the places are. You can give geographical reference to it. You can do analysis, like calculate areas. You can make pictures. You can make barriers and buffer zones and things like that. You can add spatial elements. You can, as I say, calculate areas as well. Storage and exchange is a lot easier than with maps because it's digital. You can move it around. You can do various calculations with it. So the advantages of using GIS are georeferencing. You can do that with map as well, but it's easier with GIS. Second advantage is storing it, reproducing it, exchanging it with other people. And the third advantage is different analysis, geographical spatial analysis, which you can do with it. You can do a lot of calculations of statistics with it, if you need to. Layers, capas, we call them capas. Okay, you can do all this layering. This is a very traditional part of SIG. You have different types of information as information sources, layers, we call it in English, or overlays. And this is amazingly useful, surprisingly useful in SIG Participativo, because your different countermaps, for example, you can lay them on top of each other and make a comparison between the women's map and a man's map and a men's map and a children's map. You can lay on top of each other the commercial areas and the sacred areas or something. I mean, you can use GIS for very social and political purposes because you can do this layering. You can make comparisons between things, and you can show it to of a community can show it to themselves to discuss. You can do with limits and buffers. Well, it's obvious.
Mike,
Yes.
maybe a small synthesis.
Well, maybe after this one, because this is in English, so this will be useful to synthesize, I think. Yeah. Why is PGIS, SIGPay, special? The participation part of it? Well, actually, I think we've said a lot of this already. Information on local interests, representing social as well as individuals, multiple processes of participation, so countermaps, capacity building, empowerment, and I think actually the bottom one is the most important one, that it's representing and validating, also in a political way, validating local knowledge. Okay, do you want to summarize those?
Bueno, quizá esto sería la síntesis del ordenamiento del que hablaba Eckhart, en Quetzalan, en donde participaron más de 1,000 personas, en talleres de diferentes edades, etcétera, intereses. Y lo que se hace en síntesis es que se pasa la información que se obtiene en el campo de manera participativa, con grupos locales, etcétera, a un marco tradicional del Sistema de Información Geográfica. Entonces se puede utilizar los mismos cálculos que hacen para cualquier estudio de mapa convencional, utilizando los mapas sociales. Pues. Se pueden hacer cálculos de distancia, hacer sobreposiciones, etcétera.
Okay. Well, we'll look quickly at this thing called mobile GIS, and quickly at this thing called Cyber Tracker, and just pictures mostly. This is some people doing mobile GIS. Okay, we've said these things before. One of the nice things about this Sigmoville, as we call it, even in the old days, even before the idea of using telephones, iPhones, you were using a handheld computer and a GPS. So you had two pieces. Maybe like in the bottom left one, the GPS and the hand computer in one piece. Sometimes they're separate pieces. The top picture on the left is 2 10-year-old girls who have learned to make, and they're using it. The picture below is an 18-year-old lady from Africa with only primary education. Within one day, she was using this, or within much less than one day, a couple of hours of practice. You don't need a maestria in GIS to do this. Unfortunately, we lose some business. Of course, like the African lady, if something goes wrong with the machine, then she can't fix it. And you know with technology, always something goes wrong. But nowadays, like I have an African colleague, he's using the iPhone. The people in the village are using the iPhone for mapping. But when something goes wrong, they use the iPhone as a phone. They call my friend Zahabu and they say, hey, it's not working. And online result of correction. So it's a combination. I mean, my argument is I drive my car. I can do some things with my car, but I don't know how to mend everything. I can't repair everything in my car. I can still use the car. So there's no need for this African lady or the 10-year-old girls to know how everything works in GIS and satellites and GPS. You don't need to know the fine details to use it, the same like driving or many other things. The technology should be more accessible, and that's what we're doing with it. That's also Rosé. This is a little bit out of date because now the technology is more advanced, but this PDA thing is a typical hand computer. This one of a few years ago. So now the memories are bigger, the processing is faster, etc. Then you can use standard GIS, but expensive. ArcPad belongs to Esri, and it costs a lot of money. but you can use that, and then your hand computer, you load it with ArcPad. You can do all kinds of GIS things on it. You can do tracking, GPS tracking. One of the clever things is that you can take a huge space of a satellite image and do a fantastic compression, so it still fits into your iPack or into the memory card. Compression from 25 megabytes to 1 megabyte. It's not bad, with no loss of quality. With the GPS, maybe some of you have used GPS already, or maybe in your car you have TomTom. I don't know. And anyway, with the GPS, you can do all these kinds of things, where you're going, tracking, locating things, etc. Okay, let's leave this. This says there are things which can go wrong. This is a bit out of date. What date is this? 2008. But that's if you buy separately this iPack handheld computer, separately a GPS. The big advantage, as I said, of using an iPhone is that it's also a telephone. It's also everything else, and music and pictures and everything else. So it's multi-purpose. So you can do it you have many reasons to use it. If you buy one of these things, you might think, you spend all the money just for one activity, for one purpose.
But the iPhone uses satellites.
Pardon?
The iPhone uses satellites.
Yes. The iPhone has a GPS built in. I should have brought mine. Yeah, I forgot. You should have brought yours. It has a GPS built in, which is not the world's most accurate, but it's good. It's plenty good enough. It's sufficient. So it's getting the satellite images. Sorry, not the images. Getting the satellite points for the GPS. Yeah.
Pero el que yo tengo es un global mapper, más o menos de este tamaño. Y yo puedo bajar la imagen o subir la foto y rayar abajo de la selva o del bosque y tener información de esta
pero ¿qué es
sin el problema de la cubierta forestal. Porque tiene un teléfono.
¿Pero qué es
se llama Global Mapper.
¿Es una tableta?
No, es uno como esto, es un poquito más grande, con su pantalla, su lapicito, y tiene cámara, tiene todo. Lo venden aquí en México, 15 pesos.
Y 2 por 1.
¿Eh?
That's cheap.
Con un estuche de 30 euros.
I think we don't need that one. This is maybe what it looks like, the screen of a handheld computer, an iPack, with a map loaded onto it, map of a forest, and the red is the route which you've been following, which the GPS has measured, has marked. This one you've seen already, but this is using it in CEU. Los peligrosos. I think these things we've talked about already, the importance of it, the value of it. And I want to move on to Cyber Tracker. Sounds good, huh? Cyber Tracker. It's funny, it was invented by a South African guy who is the most non-techie person you could imagine, but a really nice guy, a bit eccentric. He was interested in the local knowledge of Bushmen, of San people in Namibia and in Botswana and so on, who have incredible knowledge of animal behavior, but all up here. And he designed this interaction, this software, so they could record their knowledge. These guys, you put them on a street in Defe, and they could probably follow where an animal had been going. The signs they see are so incredible. And so that's why it's called Tracker. It's originally designed for tracking animals. But the cyber tracker. Yes, like a movie. It's a series of screens which. Okay, I think the basic thing to say about it is very easy for someone to use. It's not very easy to design the program which you want to put into it. Part of a program is already there. These icons. There's a big library of icons, of pictures which you can put in. There's a big library of databases which you can put in from the website. But my experience with several colleagues, friends, all three of them, Graciela and Ale and Valentina, they all had a lot of problems putting the things together. But we are trying to write some better guidelines to make it easier. But once it is working, it is very, very easy for ordinary people to use. You open it up and it moves automatically from one screen to the next. You put in the information on one screen, then you press a button and then the next screen comes up. And it records the place and the information which you want. You could do the same with a notebook. You could just take a book along with you and your GPS, and at each point you write down the position and then you write down the information. It's not more magic than that, but it's easy to use. And it's easy to store, it's easy to send backwards and forwards and so on. Some more of the icons which they use, like what are the animals doing, and then you just click the button. How many animals are there? Click the button. You can do calculations, you can write things in. There's pictures of flowers. The Bushmen, they know the flowers, but maybe the foreign botanist doesn't know the flowers, so you can put in pictures as well. This one we were using in, good heavens, where was this? Can't remember. Yes. This one or which one? Oh, you like the one at the bottom right-hand corner, perhaps? Well, you have to describe what the animals are doing.
Yeah.
It's very graphic. Is graphical. I don't know, but further along they're fighting each other, and in between, I don't know, maybe they're dancing. There's a male, female, and then ultimately fight, dance, and then finally continue. The others, of course, are piles of shit of different kinds. A few big pieces of shit, or lots of small pieces of shit, higher up. Yes, it's a bit funny, but it's very clear what it means. No, no problem. Yeah. This is one we were using somewhere. This was in. This is in Cuba. That's what this picture was. We were doing this in Cuba, also. I've forgotten. Yeah. Okay. Right. The next method, next tool, next herramienta, is this 3D modeling. There are two different ways of doing this. You can do it very big, really big, like the one in the bottom left. The traditional way of making these is these very big ones, maybe 3 meters by 2 meters. It takes 20, 30, 40 people, several weeks to make it. The advantage is that is participation. They're working together to make it. So there's some participation. That's the advantage. The non-advantage, the disadvantage is it takes 3 weeks and a lot of people. And who's going to pay them? And what do you do with it when it's finished? Where do you keep it? So strengths and weaknesses. But many circumstances, they're good things to do. They're very visual. They're very effective for creating discussion. You can imagine this whole table is a maqueta of a comunidad or something. You can walk around it. You can look at it from different sides. You can talk about different psychological perspectives, but you also have different spatial perspectives. The light is coming from one side, so you get different shadows on it. It makes you think differently. Here you're standing very close to it, and then you're looking at another place much further away. You start to think different ideas about the community. You discuss it with the people with you. It's a fantastic stimulus to discussion about the landscape, how people are using it, the problems, etc. But it takes a long time to make it, therefore it's expensive, and it's difficult to change it afterwards. Because people have made so much effort to make it, then you come along and say, well, let's change the land use. Repaint it. No, we've worked for 3 weeks to make this. We're not going to change the colors or something. That's a disadvantage. So an alternative is a little one, we call a semi-participativo one, where we make it. We make a maqueta in the laboratory. And then we take it to a place. You still have the positive advantage of something to discuss, something to look at, but it's quicker, it's easier to do. You don't need the community to invest 3 weeks of their time to make it, and so on. So, advantages, disadvantages to both. But in any case, a very good stimulus for discussion. Much better than just a map or picture. Finally, something about presentation in computer mapping and so on. Let's see. What's important is we want to show diffuseness, fuzziness, how to show things are diffuso, or how things change. And in a standard map, you can't do that. This nice map of maize, you can't show changes in it because there's one piece of paper. But on the computer, you can do that. You can have a dynamics of how things are changing. Or you want to show things are not fixed, but they can be moving around in different places. And advantage in computer mapping, you can do that. So the computer actually is useful in this case. You can show blurring, you can show fuzziness, fuzzy boundaries, and so on. You can show layers of things, show several things at once. You can zoom in. You have one picture, but with a computer, then you can, with graphics software, you can then zoom in on something and look at bigger, like we do in our mental maps. On mental maps, not everything is equal scale. Some things are very big and some things are small. So you can do the same with the graphics. You have a basic map, but then you can zoom in and make some things look bigger. You can't do that with a standard map. Sound. You can add sound to it. You can add videos to it. You can add photos to it. Maybe someday we can add smell to it as well. Philips or something is working on having smell generators. Just 2 or 3 different, and then you can generate different smells. Yeah, mostly bad smells. Okay, these are some other things how you can do it with graphics. Not necessarily from GIS, from SIG, but from things like, you know what I mean, not Paintbox, what's it called? Photoshop. You can play around with the maps using Photoshop or other software like that. Okay, this is like trying to show a fuzzy map with fuzzy boundaries, not hard lines between places, showing conflicts. Now let's skip this one. Okay, 2 fun things to finish, I guess. This is an invention of some guy actually doing his master's degree in London, biomapping. He wants to map emotion, people's emotions as they change. So what he uses is in Spanish seems to be called a GSR. If ever any of you have been taken to the police station and given a lie detector test, I don't know, not me, but the lie detector test, they put something around. It's not measuring heartbeat, it's measuring sweatiness, galvanic skin response, we say in English. So what he did, he had something like that on people's wrists with a GPS and a recorder. They walked around the city of London and other places. When they were calm and relaxed, it was cool.
Tensión.
When tension came, when they were frightened or excited, then you get a high response. So he made maps, many maps. You can imagine you can do that. If you did that with enough people, you could start to get an indication of which part of a city people feel secure and safe and quiet, and places which are dangerous.
O sea, serían ondas del reflejo de la piel en función de los grados de tensión, ¿no? Por ejemplo, si yo estoy tenso, mi piel va a cambiar porque estoy tenso. Y entonces hay unos sensores que miden eso y lo localizan. Entonces pones un mapa de la ciudad y si todos se ponen tensos es que ahí hay una bronca, ¿no?
O son bipolares.
Yeah. Well, also, I mean, actually, you've seen some pictures here of maps which are made. The red is high tension and the green is calmness. A couple of girls walking around central London. But he had a nice example of also a boy walking around central London. Green, green, green. Suddenly some red, big reds. And they asked him afterwards, was he afraid? No, but he'd seen a really beautiful girl at that point. So, so you have to discover why red and why green. But it's a bit fun. At the moment, you could say it's a toy, but you can imagine it could be developed in urban neighborhoods as a tool for something very important, which is measuring people's feeling of security and safety. And the final one, I talked about smell. We don't yet have a way of demonstrating, but this is a New York invention called Gorka. Subway stink, Gmail. It's horrible. It's just awful when you read the description of... It's not very participatory. People send in information when they're especially traveling on the subway and something stinks. You use your cell phone or something or whatever, and then it appears on a map with a horrible description.
Is this a stink meter?
The only meter is still from here. They don't yet have it from a stick. But
GPS.
but they are doing more seriously than this in France. They're experimenting with a small device which you can have with your cell phone, and that device is measuring air pollution from cars. So easily you're getting a huge sample of air quality measure, because anybody can have this, and when you're going around the town, walking, cycling in your car, whatever, you can be measuring the air quality. And the government usually only has a few places in the city where they have some air measurement, some air quality measurement. This is a whole new field of PGI, of SIGPE, which we call volunteered geographic information, VGI. When people just sending in information about environmental problems, noise pollution, air pollution, traffic dangers, and anybody can send in this information to some website.
With Twitter.
Like Twitter. Works very similar to Twitter. Twitter is already doing some things like this. Yeah. And you can imagine the volume of information from Twitter. Twitter is not yet georeferenced, but for example, forgetting the name, the photo one.
Facebook.
No, it's photo sharing, a famous one. Can't remember the name. It's georeferenced. That was already georeferenced. YouTube is not georeferenced, but it could also be. But the photo one, Flickr is georeferenced. You can imagine when Twitter is georeferenced, the huge amount of spatial information you can have, which is participatory in the sense that it's bottom-up, but it's not participatory in the sense that you are cross-checking it, and so on. But the potential is enormous. Anyway, I think I'll stop there.
Sí, Mike. Porque son 5:30. Entonces, ¿tú quieres ahora presentar una parte más o tienes una idea del ejercicio para que...
Do you want to ask all the questions? Do we have time for a little exercise? Should we have a 5-minute break?
¿Podríamos hacer un ejercicio para, digamos, cerrar esto más participativo? ¿Sí? Okay.
Yeah. Do you want to should we take a 2-minute break? 5-minute break?
Podemos tomar 2 minutitos.
Just to. And then people are going to work in 3 groups.
Nos vamos a dividir en 3 grupos. Y por lo tanto, que pensemos en las buenas prácticas en el ejercicio espacial. Es muy antropológico, pues. Y el tercero sería, ¿cuáles serían las buenas prácticas después del ejercicio? Si pensamos en cómo tenemos que llegar con la gente, cómo trabajamos con la gente y qué derivado del trabajo con la gente serían buenas prácticas para utilizar, para que esta gente se empodere o pues tenga más poder utilizando los mapas. ¿Cuáles serían entonces esas buenas prácticas? ¿Sí, captan? ¿O preguntas?
No preguntas. Respuestas. The groups, before, during, after. Does it matter?
¿Qué les parece entonces si la mesa del principio de la entrada trabajaría las buenas prácticas antes de hacer el ejercicio?
Antes, yes, antes.
Ustedes serían antes
Antes del inicio de proyecto.
del proyecto. Aquí serían durante el proyecto.
Muy importante.
Muy importante porque derivarían a cuáles serían las buenas prácticas después del proyecto.
Sobre la información colectando, por ejemplo, what to do with it.
No sé si se entiende, a ver. ¿Sí está claro? A tener una información que la gente le puede ser útil, que a nosotros como investigadores nos puede ser útil, y entonces cómo conducir ese proyecto en esos 3 momentos.
I make one suggestion that I just make a suggestion because I'm always emphasizing seek pay for what? What is the purpose? So I don't want to give you an exercise in which I say just do seek pay, just do it, and give buen práctica. So the seek pay that you are designing, you're thinking about, is a seek pay for buen vivir. You're going to a community, or somebody's going to the community to do some mapping, mapeo participativo, seek participativo, for the purpose of developing a program of buen vivir in the community. So keep that's the focus of that's the purpose of the seek pay. Then the task for you is to say, okay, what should be the good practice preparation before going to the community? What should be the good practice during the operation, during the activities in the community? And this one is what is the good practice and what to do with the information afterwards.
Ok, entonces nos centramos a esto. Vamos a problematizarlo en el sentido de que el proyecto sería para construir en consenso un plan de vida, adoptando los argumentos estos del buen vivir, ¿no? Que no son, digamos, un ordenamiento ecológico, una cosa más técnica o, digamos, un plan de desarrollo. El buen vivir sería como una alternativa local al desarrollo. ¿Y qué les parece si tomamos el eje del patrimonio biocultural? ¿No? No, porque el buen vivir significa mantener, enriquecer, transformar, ¿no?
But we don't need to get into too many details.
Ok. Entonces, sería...
A ver, el ordenamiento ecológico territorial puede servir para muchas cosas. Entonces, no es que no se haga, sino es enfocado hacia el buen vivir.
Exacto.
No, que no se trata de...
It's just to have a purpose for the people, for the seek pay. Yeah. Okay.
¿Lo conoces?
15 minutos?
No.
15 minutos.
¿Tienen preguntas?
Sí.
A ver.
Las buenas prácticas durante el ejercicio es que de nosotros la práctica.
No, porque es participativo. O sea, imagínate cuál sería la mala práctica en el momento que ejecutes el proyecto. Pues que te pelees con la gente, ¿no? Que no te peleen, que no hagas un ejercicio. Ya te estoy diciendo muchas cosas.
I'm sure as anthropologists you have things of good practice in anthropological research.
O sea, cómo hacer la investigación, cómo llegar a la comunidad, cómo,
exactly.
O sea, por eso es parte de nuestra actitud hacia el taller.
The only thing I add is the activity of a mapping is participatory mapping. So you are telling these people, the team, the outside team, how to behave with people to make sure they participate. Hay un equipo que visitan a la comunidad por el razón de trabajar con ciclos específicos. ¿Qué es las buenas prácticas por este equipo por trabajar en la comunidad? Good behavior. Don't throw money around. Don't steal. You know. I think. Okay. Simple. Muy simple. Yes.
O sea, es antes, durante y después.
Sí.
Es plan de vida, es el buen vivir, es un plan de vida basado en el buen vivir, utilizando el enfoque del análisis espacial participativo.
Yeah. I think the focus for you is the information which is collected, what is good practice, what to do with that information, who will keep it, who will, well, I won't say more things, but yeah, it's not, it's easy.
Por ejemplo, nosotros allá en la Huasteca ya hicimos un ejercicio de los mapas. O sea, ahí la bronca que tienen es que igual hay muchos proyectos de ecoturismo. Ya hay un centro ceremonial en la zona Tenec, pero ellos construyeron y ellos quieren registrar así como lo que va a pasar ahí. Pero ahorita nosotros, o sea, como la duda que tenemos con esto es, ya hicimos los mapas, ya están ahí. Para toda la comunidad.
Ya aplicando, sí.
Cero. Invitación abierta.
Ellos sí quieren, están de acuerdo con que sea un atractivo turístico, pero ellos cuidan mucho que no haya basura, no utilizan ninguna cosa desechable. O sea, no están en desacuerdo, pero ellos están pensando en una manera de sí promocionarlo, pero sin que sea como tan invasivo. Ellos organicen, ¿no?
Bueno, el compañero no lo presenté, ¿tu nombre? Marco Antonio viene de la Universidad Autónoma de Tlaxcala, está trabajando conmigo y con la maestra Olga Villeda de la Escuela de Ciencias Ambientales y van a hacer un ejercicio similar. Entonces, por eso está aquí.
Iniciar pues es identificar un grupo local que esté interesado o que pueda potencialmente estar interesado en trabajar en este tipo de procesos. Puede ser una organización local muy constituida, un comité, en fin, los grupos pueden ser diversos, ¿no? Y es como la fase de la presentación de los objetivos de lo que queremos hacer con ellos, primero ante el grupo, y si es posible también ante asamblea, ¿no? Sobre todo validar en la asamblea lo que queremos hacer y como desde un inicio empezar a poner en claro de manera muy transparente con la gente local cuál es, digamos, el espíritu del trabajo que se quiere lograr, ¿no? En primera instancia hacer énfasis en el tema del diálogo de saberes, es decir, tratar de construir un proceso en el cual hay un diálogo hasta donde se pueda y lo mayor que se pueda asimétrico, en donde no haya, digamos, una imposición del saber académico, técnico, científico sobre el saber local, sino que haya constantemente esta retroalimentación, esta ida y vuelta entre una dimensión y otra. Una serie de identificación, incluso construcción de principios éticos entre el equipo que está trabajando externo y el equipo local de la propia comunidad, en torno a cuáles van a ser los alcances de la investigación, qué es lo que se pretende lograr, los productos que se generen, digamos, cuál va a ser el control en torno al uso, al acceso, a la difusión de esa información que se va a generar. Entonces, digamos, en términos de ética, dejar muy claro con ellos qué es lo que se busca y qué se pretende lograr. Y luego decíamos que sería importante hacer algo así como un sondeo participativo, es decir, un primer mapeo, una primera identificación de cuál es la situación de la comunidad, cuáles son los actores locales, cuáles son los grupos, incluso decíamos hacer algo así como un mapeo de conflictos, identificar a los actores de esos conflictos, tanto internos como hacia afuera, espacializar incluso esos conflictos, si son conflictos por un espacio específico como un manantial o una serie de recursos, ¿no? Es decir, como tener un primer acercamiento desde los actores, desde los conflictos y espacializado a nivel comunitario. Y luego nombrar este comité que sería el grupo local de investigación, que lo ideal sería que fuera nombrado en asamblea, validado en asamblea, que va a ser el equipo que va a acompañar, que se va a convertir en el equipo promotor local, que va a trabajar en coordinación con nosotros. Y ya después empezar con una fase de diagnóstico, ¿no? Es decir, antes de hacer esto que le decimos el plan de vida, esto que le decimos el plan de vida, o lo que podría convertirse en el plan de comunitario, es primero importante hacer una fase de diagnóstico. Entonces este diagnóstico también tiene que ser participativo, tenemos que identificar a nivel territorial cuáles son las problemáticas en torno a los recursos, en torno a la relación que se tiene con el entorno. Entonces es identificar problemáticas, identificar causas y a lo mejor ya también ir perfilando algunas alternativas con la gente que tienen que ser también construidas participativamente y ya en una segunda fase priorizadas también participativamente en la asamblea. Se tienen también que establecer de manera muy clara en esta fase desde que se da el primer contacto con el grupo local, el grupo promotor, hasta que ya se valida en la asamblea el asunto de cuáles van a ser las metodologías que se van a usar, cuáles van a ser los tiempos, ¿no? Porque muchas veces los tiempos de uno, institucionales, y los tiempos de la comunidad son distintos, cuáles van a ser los recursos, se tienen que reajustar participativamente los objetivos, las metas, los productos que se pretenden generar, y además se tiene que establecer con mucha claridad cuáles van a ser esos resultados que se buscan, ¿no? Entonces ya después vendría ya la fase, digamos, ya bueno, sí, ¿no? El segundo equipo.
¿Alguna pregunta? 2 minutos de preguntas, observaciones, ausencias en su propuesta. Bueno, yo creo que la última parte sería como, digamos, cómo establecer el contrato de manera participativa, ¿no? Sí. Es decir, cómo establecer los compromisos entre nosotros y las gentes en función de priorizar, uno, los problemas de las gentes, segundo, hacer de este ejercicio uno que le ayude a la gente, que le dé elementos para defenderse, para protegerse, etcétera. Y tercero, que sea firmado o consensuado para que se establezca un diálogo a lo largo de lo que sigue, ¿no?
Yo tengo una observación. Si uno lo plantea así, tal como lo plantean ustedes, es bastante difícil de entrar, en el sentido de que la gente dice, bueno, ¿y eso para qué? Entonces, tal vez sería importante, interesante, hacer realmente un ejercicio de cuáles son los principales problemas y ya después fijar el diagnóstico participativo, pero escoger un problema. El escoger un problema de tal manera para que pueda ser la puerta de entrada para esa, ya después se sacan los aretes y las. Entonces, sí, efectivamente, habla del diagnóstico participativo.
Trae el mapeo del conflicto anterior.
Sí, bueno, correcto. Pero que entonces se elija un tema que les interese de inmediato, que pueda detonar el proceso de entrada.
Tal vez sí, porque aquí estamos presentando un eje donde va a solucionar todas las alternativas, ¿no? Y en este caso sería escoger solamente una alternativa necesaria, justa, para que ya de esto empecemos a hacer marcha y empecemos a ejecutar este proyecto.
Ya.
Y yo pienso que todo este tipo de procedimientos no son propiamente así como una receta, ¿no? Sino que en algunos casos incluso la gente hasta te demanda más, ¿no? Si es una organización ya con objetivos muy claros, te dicen hacia dónde, ¿no? En otros casos, pues justamente más bien se trata de empezar a construir casi desde cero, ¿no? O sea, si llegas yo creo con la TOSEPA con algo así, pues ya hasta lo tienen regresado, ¿no?
Nos rebasan.
Entonces, incluso lo que veíamos es que muchas de estas partes no son así tan cronológicas, ¿no? Sino que en realidad todo ocurre sobre la totalidad del proceso.
Even distribution, old and young, men and women, rich and poor, cattle keepers, farmers, but maybe that's not what the community feels at the moment. Any action like this, going into to do some mapping, any action is an intervention. We are breaking into the community. And we're breaking in, even though we say we're breaking in because we want us to come, etc. But where do you find the balance between saying this is what we the researchers, think is, or what the mappers think is needed, and what the community is saying. I don't think there's an answer to that question, but I think we should always be aware that we are always intervening. Just the very fact that we're there, it is an intervention, and then there has to be a balance for that. So the question is, who will participate? Who decides who will participate? Okay, and the other one was just for a practical point about having some kind of work plan, some kind of timetable for it. Yeah.
Sí, sí. Nosotros vamos, ya consensuamos, hicimos un programa, ellos definen quiénes quieren participar y entonces hacemos un ejercicio que tenga un resultado inmediato, más o menos inmediato, y lo imprimimos y lo regresamos. Es decir, una manera de reciprocar, ¿no? Y eso a la gente le parece bien y entonces se abre un poco más esa participación. Yo hago un mapa, yo sé cómo hacerlo en CorelDRAW, ¿no? En X software, lo imprimo, llevo un póster, lo regalo y entonces empiezo yo a este ejercicio de ida y vuelta, ¿no? Bueno, ¿qué les parece entonces? Con estas bases escuchemos en 5 minutos el ejercicio. Ya estamos en el momento de que estamos operando el proyecto, estamos en el proceso más intenso de establecer relaciones con la gente, de problemas que aparecen ahí, etcétera, etcétera. Adelante.
Can we applaud this one?
Yes.
Very good.
Abierta a toda la comunidad, incluir hombres y mujeres y diferentes edades a considerar de estos dos sectores. Pero pues ya durante el transcurso de esta etapa, pues pensamos que en principio había que tomar en cuenta la opinión de todos, porque eso pues nos daría finalmente oportunidad de ver una panorámica más miscelánea, pues consensar temas de trabajo a partir de la opinión de cada sector. Pero pues esto también se derivaría de la realización de transectos para identificar los puntos de interés para la gente. Entonces, pues eso finalmente nos llevaría a un reconocimiento de su espacialidad. Lo que esperaríamos de esta etapa es que la gente también identificara los problemas que les resultaran más significativos. Nos imaginamos un poco el ejercicio en la Sierra Tarahumara, entonces pues eso nos dio cierta perspectiva de imaginarnos lo que podía ser hallado. Entonces anotamos que se identificaron sitios importantes para la comunidad, ríos, cerros, arroyos, cuevas, etc. Y a partir de esto, pues la gente señalaría que uno de los problemas a resolver sería lo que contamina a los animales, los manantiales por animales, es decir, por el pastoreo excesivo. Y pues también igualmente la degradación del ambiente, y que tendría que ver justamente con este pastoreo caprino excesivo y la tala clandestina. Bueno, pues ya identificados estos dos grandes problemas, pues lo que buscaríamos es identificar cuáles son los saberes locales que darían la pauta para resolverlos. Y pues aquí ya se acudiría a la tecnología tradicional, que en este caso sería la construcción de corrales de piedra para la protección de los manantiales y corrales para las cabras. Entonces este tipo de opciones pues sería algo que estaría, digamos, al alcance de la misma gente. Pero ya en la cuestión de la tala clandestina, pues aquí se sugeriría que pues podría ser un patrullaje comunitario, que pues también por supuesto en un momento dado involucraría pues a las agencias federales, no sé. Y pues ya por último, hecho esto, sería la identificación de tecnología de tanto tradicional como de saberes externos, lo que ya le podría dar la pauta de opciones aplicables, ¿no?, a esta realidad. Pues creo que ya sería todo.
Quizá en buenas prácticas, a ver, sí.
Un tema muy interesante y muy importante que si ustedes desean incorporarlo, para mí es deseable, es la formación de un equipo de investigación local. O sea, no solamente del equipo de investigación ad hoc en el momento para hacer el mapeo, sino de formar un equipo local que pueda enfrentar los problemas y las necesidades aún no estando nosotros. Entonces tenemos experiencias muy interesantes tanto en Vicente Guerrero como en Chinantla, en donde ya hay un grupo de jóvenes, incluso avalados por la asamblea, que están ya siendo los investigadores de la comunidad. Y entonces el papel de nosotros es pues proporcionarles las herramientas necesarias para esto. Entonces hay que incorporar desde el principio, desde la primera presentación, segunda presentación de cómo hacerlo, y la tercera presentación, qué resultados esperamos en la formación de grupos, gente joven, mujeres, etcétera, que están interesados en utilizar estas herramientas y que podrían convertirse realmente en el núcleo de los custodios. Si usted, les digo porque estoy emocionadísimo viendo a la Tosepan cómo le hacen. Hay un grupo de jóvenes, de mujeres y hombres jóvenes que están pero pilas haciendo este tipo de cosas, pero no solamente en el terreno de la geografía, en la literatura, en la tradición oral, haciendo tecnologías, ¿no? En fin, algo impresionante. Y entonces a lo mejor modestamente, ya que estamos trabajando ahí, la formación de un grupo local para enfrentar este tipo de problemas.
Yo quisiera señalar dos cosas relacionadas con esto. Uno, recordar la experiencia que nosotros tuvimos en culturas populares con los promotores. Fue buenísimo. Es decir, en este ejercicio la idea sería entrenar a los que van a entrenar, a los que van a ser los líderes locales, a los que van a aprender a registrar la memoria, a difundir la memoria, y entonces en ese grupo local, por ejemplo, capacitar a agentes con video y para hacer programas de radio. Entonces difundirlos localmente. Hacer un programa de radio no nos cuesta mucho en la computadora. Lo que cuesta es la investigación que hace la propia gente y cómo traducir eso en un programa, meterle música, etc. Y para eso hay software, ¿no? Y entonces se haría. Lo siguiente que yo diría, para callarme, es que yo tendría mucho cuidado en no hablar demasiado durante el proceso. Es decir, en no incidir, en no querer que las cosas se hagan como yo quiero que se hagan, sino hacer mi trabajo de tal manera que yo soy el acompañante de un proceso y ayudo, y en algún momento doy mi opinión, y en algún momento sí establezco una relación, digamos, de experto, pues, pero asumiendo que están ellos también como expertos y que están narrando eso, para no meter ruido y romper con el proceso.
Nada más sobre eso, que ya no lo dijimos hace un rato. Hablábamos de la importancia del método de campesino a campesino, que muchas veces eso te descentra a ti como externo de ese papel de tirar línea y de direccionar el proceso. Es más bien cómo favoreces que otras organizaciones, otras experiencias transmitan su quehacer y su experiencia a la organización con la que estás trabajando. Y entonces puede ser desde invitarlos a los de Vicente Guerrero para que les expliquen cómo mejoraron genéticamente su maíz criollo, o hasta pasarles un video y demás, en fin. O sea, como que de repente esa intervención se puede hacer no de manera tan directa, y más bien incluso favoreciendo una transmisión más horizontal. Eso te rompes con el esquema extensionista de la Zagarpa, de que llega el agrónomo y les dice esto debe ser así, pues, ¿no? Entonces creo que hay varias metodologías de campesino a campesino que podrían retomar también, ¿no?
Y por eso el curso que el diplomado sería muy bueno en este caso para aplicarlo a estos cursos de Vicente, el grupo G.
The people in the community, whether they want to do this or not, they have many other things to do. We have to be very careful about the time. But you have to find a balance between being too fast and being too slow. Being too slow is taking up too much of their time. Being too fast is too much outside saying, do this, do this, do this. It's difficult to find a balance, but that's why I think it helps to have, at the beginning, some discussion about how long things will take, how much time will take. The second thing is very practical. These are maps. Maps are power. The information on maps is powerful and can be dangerous. And we can give you examples from other countries where the mapping, the participatory mapping, has put people in danger. Where in the community, maybe the children are doing things and are making the maps, and the children are saying, my parents are doing something illegal, whatever it is, cutting firewood, selling things which they shouldn't do. Other places, people have given information about where, what the equivalent here would be where narcos are staying or something. In other countries, those kinds of things. And or where drug dealers are working or something like that. Or in Philippines, the example where the guerrillas were hiding in the forest. And this information puts a lot of put these people in extreme danger from one side or the other side. So because maps have this extra special information, I think you have to be very careful about not putting the people into danger.
Nada más un detallito con respecto a la identificación de problemas. Pone la tala clandestina, pero también estamos trabajando sobre prácticas cotidianas que afectan. Entonces no necesariamente tiene que ser tala clandestina, sino es la tala cotidiana, pues que hace la misma gente, ¿no? Ya quizá con el patrullaje se encontrará que pues sí hay quienes sigan o de fuera que hagan la tala.
Sí, yo creo que este ejemplo de la tala clandestina es lo que señalaba, y esto es importantísimo, ¿no? Es decir, nosotros estamos interviniendo y podemos generar broncas porque seguimos adentro, ¿no? Sí. Entonces la ética, el saber hacerlo, el cuidado, la sensibilidad, ¿no? Porque, por ejemplo, si trabajamos la tala clandestina, a lo mejor mi hermano está haciendo tala clandestina y vive en la misma casa que yo vivo. Entonces va a haber conflicto familiar, ¿no?
Sí, de hecho, rápidamente, cuando hablábamos de esta cuestión de identificación de problemas, lo que se corre el riesgo es de polarizar situaciones, porque pues, pensando nuevamente en el contexto de la tarahumara, pues la relación entre indígenas y mestizos no siempre es fácil. Entonces, claro, pero igualmente el indígena puede caer en el mismo error que el mestizo. Entonces nosotros no podemos tampoco señalar o orillar a la gente a que diga, no, pues es que son los yoris, o no. Y aquí sí es un aspecto importante de mucho tiempo, pues justamente para evitarnos poner la situación en un extremo tal que pues a la larga nos pueda traer más problemas que beneficios.
Yo lo que me he dado cuenta es que nosotros, queridos estudiantes y antropólogos, traemos un bagaje de prejuicios increíbles. Hablamos, por ejemplo, de tala y vemos un árbol caído y decimos, tala, horrible. Me he enfrentado ahorita justamente en la discusión que estuvimos en Quetzalan sobre un proyecto alternativo de medio ambiente, que muchos estudiantes, incluso en Tlaxcala, pero también de otros, decían, no, es que la tala y hay aprovechamientos sostenibles, inclusive no legales, puede ser sostenible. Entonces, primero, no se trata de moderen su latín, no se trata de explotación. Sí se trata de explotación minera, pero se trata de aprovechamientos forestales. Los aprovechamientos forestales, la mayoría de los casos bien manejados, son absolutamente benéficos al bosque. Entonces, tenemos un latín bastante pesado de la ciudad, a veces en un ecologismo barato, y metemos un montón de prejuicios citadinos. Por ejemplo, cuando vamos a las comunidades, nuestra mente está totalmente aleccionada con un discurso pobrista hacia lo otro, o bien folclorizante hacia lo otro, o bien una serie de cuestiones de lo otro. Entonces, un elemento importante dentro de la investigación antropológica es desmantelar la propia ideología, en el mismo tenor de que los saberes, conocimientos y creencias. Nosotros tenemos saberes, tenemos conocimientos y tenemos creencias. En el mismo tenor que los indígenas tienen saberes, conocimientos y creencias. Y entonces, lo que se ocupa aquí es que cualquier entrada es una entrada de intercambio de saberes, de modestia, de no prejuzgar con un lenguaje distinto. Por ejemplo, para cualquier feminista ese cabrón es un macho, y bueno, puede ser un macho de muchos matices, un macho cultural, un macho violento, macho menos, un homosexual escondido, qué sé yo. Hay varias cuestiones de prejuzgar desde nuestra... entonces, por ejemplo, ahora que fuimos a Nochistlán, en Vicente Guerrero, un estudiante de antropología preguntó: ¿y qué están haciendo ustedes en contra de la infestación de los nopales por un virus? Entonces se refería de un fenómeno que se llama el cartoblasto, que apenas está en Quintana Roo, y que ya estaba interrogando a los pobres campes de Vicente Guerrero, del cartoblastos, que ni es virus, ni está en la zona, y no es que está haciendo algo, ¿no? En fin, quiero decir que es todo un trabajo en uno mismo, de ir desmantelando fantasías, ideologías, creencias y muy pocos conocimientos.
Quizá entonces, en lugar de poner tala clandestina, poner aprovechamiento del bosque y ver cuál es, problematizar el aprovechamiento del bosque y evitar esto, ¿no?
El problema es que ahí estamos en un rubro de identificación de problemas, ¿no?
Sí, bueno, si la gente lo identifica como un robo, entonces llamarlo a eso.
Sí, se supone que eso, el ejercicio que hicimos nosotros fue justo como si fuera la comunidad la que estuviera hablando. Es hipotético, ¿no?
Ok, bueno, pero digamos que en síntesis cubre, digamos, ese proceso intenso, ¿no? Es el proceso más intenso, ¿no? Es el proceso donde tenemos que... Si acá, es el proceso más sensible aquí, es el proceso más intenso, aquí sí que no sea sensible, pero allí se necesita mucha mayor sensibilidad y aquí se necesita mucha inteligencia para navegar de tal manera que no afectemos, porque estamos interviniendo, ¿no? Estamos ejerciendo una acción desde afuera que puede trastocar la vida de familias, gentes, individuos, corazones, emociones y lo demás, ¿no? Entonces, bueno, pues un aplauso.
Lo primero pues es socializar toda esa información que se supone que ya tenemos con los participantes, pues que hayan decidido pues ser parte del ejercicio, y pues lo otro sería un consenso y que va de la mano de una evaluación de toda esta información, y todo eso pues en función de los objetivos, y parte de eso es pues primero preguntarse si se cumplieron como esas expectativas que se plantearon en un principio y cuáles van a ser los usos y la administración de esa información, ¿no? Después, bueno, ya pasaremos a la parte de quién y cómo se va a administrar esa información, ¿no? Y bueno, aquí en esta misma parte sobre la evaluación, pues planteamos que si los resultados responden o no a las expectativas o a sus objetivos, y qué nuevos hallazgos, ¿no? Hay, porque bueno, pues partimos de que en este trayecto pues vamos encontrando como nuevas cosas o nuevos ejercicios que aporta la práctica de la etnocartografía, ¿no? Y bueno, la identificación también de problemas, ¿no? Que pues yo creo va de la mano con lo que ahorita platicábamos. Y lo siguiente sería cómo vamos a organizar toda esa información, o sea, cómo y quién va a tener como esa información, y las acciones, o sea, qué se va a hacer y cómo generar las líneas de trabajo, cómo, pues lo que decíamos, ¿no? De no ejercer nosotros una función como de protagonista, sino de acompañar como todo este ejercicio y ver qué se va a hacer, ¿no? Qué productos se pueden, qué cosa puede salir de ahí, qué otros proyectos se pueden hacer a partir de eso. Poníamos un ejemplo de la Huasteca Potosina, que es una zona que pues tiene como esta invasión de proyectos ecoturísticos disfrazados de ecológicos, pero entonces ¿cómo, no? ¿Cómo a través de este ejercicio pues entonces generar nuevos proyectos para que ellos administren, ¿no?, su propio territorio y ponderar la información, ¿no?, de qué va a ser público y qué es privado, que pues sí creemos que ese es así un punto bien importante, que pues sí se tiene que consensuar con los participantes, ¿no?, con la comunidad. Y pues no sé si quieren agregar algo más.
A ver, ¿alguna observación, comentario, alguna idea?
Bueno, aquí se me ocurre que, bueno, estaba incluso comentando con Gabriel, que yo creo que una parte importante sería justo que ellos se apropien de toda la metodología y que después ya nosotros nos sirvamos, digamos, de alguna manera como mediadores o como facilitadores, sino que ellos puedan utilizar las herramientas para que ellos lleven a cabo proyectos propios. Sí, es un poco la idea, ¿no? Que nosotros ya, digamos, ya no tengamos un papel principal, digamos.
Cada vez que uno va a un pueblo sale con un compadre, ¿no? Ya tiene uno que regresar, pues ahí... Pero yo creo que aquí está faltando solamente explicitar algo desde el punto de vista, que sería, digamos, cuáles son las normas, leyes, artículos a nivel internacional, nacional, federal, estatal, municipal, etcétera, que podrían ayudar a esta gente a resguardar su patrimonio biocultural. Es decir, además de darles, además de que esto ofrece un panorama y una ruta de trabajo, lo otro es qué se puede hacer legalmente para defender esto, ¿no? Porque ellos solos y nosotros con ellos no lo podemos hacer. Entonces, esa parte del protocolo al final es muy importante. Si yo quiero defender algo, ¿existe alguna ley que me permita defenderlo? ¿Cuál es el artículo? ¿Cuál es la agencia gubernamental? ¿En dónde está? ¿Y cuál es la política o el programa que podría aprovechar yo para generar esto? Ahí creo que sería una parte, digamos, como más...
Hemos colocado en hacer un acompañamiento de la gestión.
Perfecto. ¿Algún otro comentario? Mike?
Just to reinforce, because you said something about the protocol from the beginning.
Yes.
And that's the link, of course, between the first group and the last one. That these questions of who will own the information and who will have access to it. Obviously, it's something in between. Everything is secret and everything is open. It's something in between that. But that should be, as much as possible, discussed and agreed before the project begins. But as the process of mapping, participatory mapping continues, maybe for 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, people's views change. So maybe the original protocol should also not be like a legal document. Maybe one party or the other party want to change it, because as you do the process, it's participatory, it's developing, it's dynamic. So maybe at the end, it may be the agreement on who owns the information may be different from the beginning. But as Narciso said, you have to have that agreement at the beginning as well. I also like this very much, the idea that there's a lot of feedback at every stage. There's a lot of feedback, and when you, from the community, consensus.
Hallazgos nuevos.
Always coming back and seeing and the evaluation of the information is also participatory in different ways, not just with the whole group, but with small groups within the community, etc. Yeah, no, it's nice.
Hay una cosa que sucede en nuestro país y en las comunidades, y no en todas, que es una reunión oficial en socializar la información tiene muchas formas. Puede ser un documento que se reparte, pero hay un modus en algunas comunidades en donde hay que convocar a la asamblea y presentar a la asamblea los resultados y entregar los resultados oficialmente a las autoridades de esas comunidades, que son autoridades que las autoridades las tendrán en custodia, esa información. Por ejemplo, si son mapas, entregar mapas; si son libros, entregar libros; si son fotos, entregar las fotos oficialmente a la asamblea. Y como muchas veces es la asamblea que los aceptó para hacer los estudios. No en todas partes, pero así a mí me ha pasado en dos o tres modalidades en ese sentido.
Yo le añadiría, que ellos establezcan un mecanismo de normatividad de los nuevos guardianes sobre el patrimonio, la conservación del patrimonio, pues, que ahí se formalice quiénes fueron capacitados y de alguna manera la comunidad les da un papel y un estatus, que es muy importante, ¿no? Ese sería uno. El otro que a mí me encanta, pero bueno, es uno de muchos, es, digamos, esto puede motivar la creación de un museo local, un centro de interpretación local, en donde se guarde esa memoria y se esté revisando espejeando, como dicen los psicólogos, ¿no? Permanentemente, para que entonces el proyecto no sea un proyecto que fuimos, hicimos y acompañamos, vamos a ver a la comadre, al compadre, sino que siga, ¿no?
Sí, yo creo que, digamos, esta parte de acciones y generar líneas de trabajo, pues se desglosa en 1000 cosas que dependen mucho del planteamiento inicial del proyecto. Pero ciertamente no es el fin de un proceso, sino es el principio de otro gran proceso. Por eso queda como generar grandes líneas, pues, de trabajo y de acción, ¿no? Que darán nuevos resultados, que darán nuevos proyectos, etcétera, nuevos problemas.
Pues con esto se cerrarían las tres procesos, las tres etapas de un mismo proceso que están intercalados. Y pues un aplauso y